Welcome to the Storytelling That Sticks for Business and Life podcast. I'm your Keynote, TED Talk, and story coach, Doug Stevenson. In this podcast series, I'm going to share with you some simple and practical storytelling techniques and hacks that will make you stand out from the competition so that you can get paid to speak, or to give a TED Talk that goes viral, or to simply tell your story in a way that makes a difference in the world. You'll learn how to choose, craft, and deliver stories that stick. Personal stories from your amazing life, business stories, leadership and sales stories, stories that are marketable and memorable, stories that sell you and your product or service. My job as your virtual keynote and story coach is to help you design and deliver stories and speeches that get people to do what you want them to do, or to consider a new perspective. If you're serious about using storytelling to advance your career, to get paid to speak, or simply to get your message across in a more engaging and compelling manner, this podcast is for you. All right, well, let's get started. In episode 42, on the 12 story types, part 2, I talked about game changer stories. Stories about famous people who have made a major impact on the world, on society or science or politics or business. And in the case of Steven Spielberg, on movies and entertainment. Game changer stories immediately capture our attention because most of us know the person the story is about. At least we know something about them because of what they've done or what they're known for, like Mark Zuckerberg for Facebook, or Lionel Messi for football, or Oprah Winfrey for her TV show, or Barack Obama for being the first Black president of the United States. And in the case of Steven Spielberg, we know about him because of his movies, like Jaws. You remember that one? Or Raiders of the Lost Ark? E.T., the Extraterrestrial, Schindler's List, Jurassic Park, Saving Private Ryan, West Side Story, and most recently, his autobiographical film, The Fabelmans. But what you get to do with a game changer story about a famous person is you get to tell the story of who they are and how they became who they are, what drove them to succeed, and what obstacles and challenges they faced along the way. What's more interesting than the backstory of someone famous, their personal life, their family background? But the reason you tell a game changer story is because of the lesson you can take from their pursuit of success, how they did it, the choices they made along the way, and how you and I can learn from their successes and failures. Because at the end of the day, the fact that they reached the pinnacle of success by making the most of their innate skills, talents, and aptitudes is a roadmap for how you and I can make the most of our innate skills, talents, and aptitudes as well. So in this episode, I'm going to tell you the Steven Spielberg story. And just so you know, I had to do lots of research online to find the information I'm going to share with you. One of the main sources of information is Wikipedia, but that wasn't enough to get the full picture. I had to do lots of different searches and take lots of notes and watch lots of videos and read lots of interviews. But if you invest the time, you can find enough biographical information online to then craft a story that teaches the lesson you want to teach. Okay, well, here goes. Are you ready? This is my Steven Spielberg game changer story. Steven was born in 1946 in Cincinnati, Ohio, to a Jewish family. Now, you might think that Steven had it easy growing up, but that's not true. His family moved 3 times, from Ohio to New Jersey to Arizona. He was the oldest of 4 kids with 3 younger sisters. That must have been challenging. His father was an electrical engineer who worked on computers, and his mother was a concert pianist. Think about that. An engineer father and a concert pianist mother. Now, that's a recipe for friction, right? So they fought. And sometimes their fights were so loud, Steven would stuff towels under his bedroom door to keep out the noise. His father was very distant, working long hours, and when he was around, he and Steven would fight about his grades. Steven was so preoccupied with movies and cameras that he failed to pay attention to his studies. And then his parents were divorced by the time Steven was 12. Does that sound like a stable childhood to you? Or does it sound like a childhood you'd look for an escape from? His teachers described Steven as geeky and awkward, and he was often bullied by the bigger kids. He was also the only Jewish kid in a very waspy neighborhood. One of the places he'd go for refuge to escape the bickering and fighting was the movies on Saturday afternoons. In an interview with the American Film Institute, he talked about the movies that most influenced him, starting with Captains Courageous, a 1937 film about Harvey, the obnoxious young son of an outlandishly wealthy and emotionally remote business magnate. Well, Harvey gets suspended from his boarding school because he kept breaking the rules and getting in trouble. So Harvey is forced to join his father on a transatlantic steamship trip. But his life takes a dramatic turn when he falls overboard and is rescued by Manuel, a Portuguese fisherman played by Spencer Tracy. Well, Manuel is a salt-of-the-earth fisherman, and Harvey is a spoiled brat. But soon, Manuel takes Harvey under his wing, and Harvey begins to show a more vulnerable and sympathetic side. So, here you have a movie with a precocious child protagonist and a damaged father-son relationship. Now, it's not a stretch to see how this father-son dynamic resonated with Steven, but it's also a theme that plays out in many of Steven's other films, where a child actor plays a pivotal role in the storytelling, like Ke Huy Quan as Short Round in Raiders of the Lost Ark, or Henry Thomas as Elliot in E.T., or Ariana Richards as Lex Murphy in Jurassic Park. I think maybe Steven related to these kids trying to make a connection with their father or with someone, and that's why they play such a prominent role in so many of his movies. Now, while doing my research into Steven's early influences, I found how he credits different directors and movies as inspirations for the different kinds of movies he directed over time. And what's clear to me is that unlike you and I, when he sat there and watched a movie, he was studying camera angles and lighting, movie sets and color, wide shots and close-ups, the musical score, how tension is created, and how different shots were edited together. And finally, the critical role of a romantic love interest like you have between Indiana Jones in Marion and Raiders of the Lost Ark. His journey into making his own film started when his father came home one day with an 8mm camera. Well, Steven asked to borrow it. That's no surprise. And the rest, as they say, is history. He started shooting everything in sight. For instance, when they went on a family vacation or a trip, Steven would make a film of it, like a documentary. For instance, when they'd pull up to a hotel or a tourist spot, he'd get his dad to stop the car so that he could run up ahead and film the car arriving at the destination, driving forward. And sometimes he'd actually restage the action to make it more real. Can you imagine? That must have driven his family crazy. It's like, Steven, can we just go to the hotel? No, we got to redo it. We got to redo it. Now, Steven, like most young boys, had a vivid imagination, but it was his boundless curiosity and willingness to experiment with whatever was at hand, whatever was around him, that enabled him to replicate in some way what he was seeing at the movies on Saturday afternoon. His first home movie was of a train wreck. Now, remember I said he would work with whatever was at hand, whatever was around him. Well, he had a Lionel train set. And so he made a movie by crashing his Lionel train set. And when he turned 12, he joined the Boy Scouts. And in the Boy Scouts, you earned these merit badges. Well, he wanted to earn his photography merit badge. And so what did he do? He made a 9-minute, 8 mm film called The Last Gunfight. His short little film impressed not only the Scoutmaster, but his fellow troop members too. And the positive reaction to his project stoked a fire in Spielberg. And from all accounts, it changed him. One of the people who was involved in one of Spielberg's 8 mm movies told his biographer, quote, "He became a totally different person. So much so that even I, as a 7th grader, was impressed. He had all the football players out there, all the neat guys, all the cool guys, and he was telling them what to do. An hour ago at home or on the campus, he was a guy that you kick dirt in his eyes," unquote. Can you see it? He went from being a nerdy kid who the jocks bullied and pushed around to the director who enlisted people in his movie projects and then took control and became the leader of the pack. My take is that he wasn't lacking for self-confidence alone. He was lacking in acknowledgement and praise, something that he wasn't getting from his father. At age 13, he upped the ante by making a 40-minute war film called Escape to Nowhere. He'd grown up watching World War II movies, so he got his friends together and he went out into the desert in Arizona and he shot scene after scene of battles and explosions and people shooting each other with war surplus helmets and guns. He says that he was just figuring it out as he went. The film won his first prize in a statewide competition. And throughout his early teens and after entering high school, Spielberg made about 15 to 20 8mm adventure films. He was experimenting and learning as he went. At 14, he wanted to make another World War II movie, but this one required the use of a World War II era Army airplane. He titled it Fighter Squad. And this is where we can learn something from Steven Spielberg about chutzpah, the willingness to take bold action. Now, remember, he was 14. Think about how bold you were when you were 14. So here's what he did. He went to the Phoenix airport because he was living in Scottsdale. He went to the Phoenix airport and he convinced the general manager of the airport to allow him to shoot scenes using a vintage aircraft on the back lot of the airport. Then he got his friends to dress up in World War II Army surplus outfits. He splashed them with ketchup to make it look like blood and figured out a way to move the camera so that it looked like the plane was moving. And then he went home and edited the live footage together with documentary footage that he got somewhere of real World War II dogfights. Can you imagine a 14-year-old having an idea for a film, going to the Phoenix airport, getting a meeting with the general manager and convincing him to use a plane? This is crazy, but that's who he was. Now, when he was 16, he was still living in Scottsdale, Arizona with his father. Well, his father finally recognizing and acknowledging that Steven was really passionate about filmmaking and that he was good at it. Well, he arranged for him to visit Universal Studios in Los Angeles and to be shown around the studio lot by an assistant to the editorial supervisor of Universal TV. He had a contact. Well, Steven eventually landed a job as an unpaid intern. And while interning, he was given a day pass to get back on the lot the next day because you couldn't just get on the lot. You needed a pass. Well, like one of his most famous characters, Indiana Jones, sneaking into the enemy camp, Steven got dressed up in his best bar mitzvah clothes and, with his dad's old briefcase in hand, he strolled up to the gate, waved hello to the guard like he'd done the day before when he had a pass, and he walked right onto the lot. Now remember, he no longer had a pass. He did this every day for the rest of the summer. Steven networked his way from one connection to another, asking anyone who would listen if they'd teach him about making movies. Now, when he was 17, it was time to apply for college. The best film schools in the country were at USC and UCLA in Los Angeles. So he applied. And guess what? They turned him down because of his bad grades. So he enrolled in Cal State Long Beach in the Film and Electronics Arts Department. And after 3 years, he dropped out and began shooting a short movie called Amblin. Amblin was Steven's first completed film shot on 35 millimeters. It was financed by an aspiring movie producer named Dennis Hoffman with a budget of $15,000. The film is a short love story set during the hippie era of the 1960s about a young man and woman who meet in the desert, attempt to hitchhike, become friends, then lovers, and then make their way back to the beach and part ways. Now, that movie, Amblin, later became the namesake for Spielberg's production company, Amblin Entertainment. Some of this film was shot in a studio, but most of the footage was shot in the desert in rough terrain with an unpaid crew. And to make matters worse, it was over 105 degrees. And some of the crew members left before the film was completed. They were just so frustrated. Steven told one of the crew members that he vomited every day before coming to the set. I guess it's because he was so nervous, but that's what it took for Steven Spielberg to become the Steven Spielberg that you and I know. Whatever the obstacle, whatever the challenge, whoever he had to convince, he got it done. Now, somehow, some way, Steven convinced an executive at Universal to look at his film. Well, the rest is history. After 14 years of making films, Steven was given a 7-year contract to direct TV for Universal Studios. At 22 years of age, 22 years of age, he was the youngest person to have ever been given such a contract. In his first directing gig at Universal, he directed the pilot episode for a new series titled Night Gallery, starring Joan Crawford, who at that time was one of the biggest actresses of that era. Now, so far, and get this, so far his movies have grossed over $16 billion, $750 million. And that number goes up every single day. He's a game changer on many levels for his technical innovations, realistic portrayals, and incredibly sensitive and emotional storytelling. Okay, so that's my telling of the Steven Spielberg story, a game changer story. Now, a story like this can go in a number of directions. So when you're crafting it, you choose to include the parts of the story and the revelations and conclusions that you take from it based on the point you're trying to make or the lesson you want to share. And from working on this story, my first take is that Steven's curiosity forced him to be innovative. He was working with very rudimentary equipment at the beginning, just a camera. He didn't even have editing equipment. So he had to be very creative and innovative to create a final product. So this could be a story about curiosity, creativity, and innovation. Now, what also stood out to me is how willing he was to enroll others in his projects. Now, it started out with his family members, but very quickly expanded to include his schoolmates. And in the case of his movie, Fighter Squad, he had to go to the Phoenix airport and convince the general manager to let him shoot his movie using World War II vintage airplanes. He even convinced the people at American Airlines to let him shoot some scenes inside a plane in between when the plane landed and took off again. Oh my gosh, this guy was such a networker. Now, this aspect of the story can lead to lessons in leadership. He must have had, at a very early age, an ability to persuade people to collaborate with him. How else could he get people to act in his films for free and to work as crew members? So if you focus on that aspect of his story, well, now it's a leadership story. However, All right, let's take it a little further. This could also be a story about sales. I think Stephen must have been a pretty good salesman. One example is when he went to his scoutmaster to apply for the photography merit badge. When he proposed making a movie, rather than shooting still shots with a camera, the scoutmaster said, no, you got to use a camera. But after a couple of rounds of convincing arguments, the scoutmaster eventually said yes. Stephen sold him on the idea that one camera was as good as another. Now, you can also make this story about following your passion and never giving up. Or what else? What else? There's a lot of things. What else? How about of believing in yourself, or of the need to have a clear vision of what your end goal is, or of the humility of being willing to learn as you go. The point is, you have to decide what the point of the story is before you start crafting it. Because the point that you want to make determines what parts of the story you want to focus on. Now, I didn't do that in this case because I wanted you to see how much there is to this story and how many different lessons you can take from the same story, the same person, the same life. So here's my question for you. What point or lesson would you choose to focus on from this? What's your takeaway? Now you can see how this one game changer story about this amazing man and how he achieved extraordinary success can be used to illustrate how someone grew up in a dysfunctional family without a lot of support from his father, who was the oldest of four, who was a geeky nerd who was bullied, who didn't get top marks in school and was an average student, who never finished college, but who was passionate about making movies, was able to rise to the top of his profession with movies that challenge his audience, like The Color Purple, Saving Private Ryan, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and Munich. But he also made some movies that were adrenaline-packed adventure movies. They were just a lot of fun, like the Indiana Jones movies and the Jurassic Park movies. Man, I loved seeing those dinosaurs, didn't you? They were so real. How did he do that? That's curiosity leading into innovation. But what I like about what was revealed in my research about this story is that Stephen did not grow up in a perfect environment. He was a geeky kid who overcame obstacles, fought his way forward, made lots of different choices, overcame lots of obstacles, and made it to the top of his profession anyway. So given that, the one lesson that most resonates with me personally is his relentless determination. He was willing to break the rules, write his own rules, and ask for what he wanted time after time. He just kept going. He just kept at it, trying things that worked and didn't work. And I'm sure he got shot down a lot, dealt with a lot of rejection. But when I look at his life and how he got to where he is, the hints are there in his early life when he grabbed hold of that 8mm camera and started making movies. Steven Spielberg's story is your story and my story. It's a story of a kid who used the obstacles in his path as fuel. And that's a story that I can relate to. And that's also a story that I think will inspire anyone who hears it to realize that they too can achieve something meaningful. And finally, I want to close with a quote from Stephen himself. When asked what his advice was to people in the audience, he said, quote, "The world belongs to those who create," end quote. Oh, I love that. The world belongs to those who create. So there it is, the phrase that pays for this episode. Create something. Create something. Create something. How about you? What can you create? What will you create? Do it. Do it for yourself. Do it for me and for everyone else. Create something. All right, well, that's it for this episode. If you feel that you learned something valuable today, something that you can use that will make your stories stick, stories that make you and your business memorable, marketable, and monetizable, there are 3 things I'd like you to do. First, click on the follow or subscribe button and leave a review wherever you listen. And second, share this podcast with your friends and coworkers, your email list, and on social media. And third, connect with me on LinkedIn. And when you're ready to get serious about taking your stories to the next level, or if you have an important speech, presentation, or TED Talk coming up, or if you want some guidance on how to make the transition to becoming a professional speaker, let's schedule your free 30-minute coaching session where we can get to know each other and see if we're a good fit. And as always, I'd love to hear from you with your questions and comments. Let me know that you're out there listening and learning. You can send an email with your questions, comments, and suggestions to Deborah at dougstevenson.com. That's Deborah, Deborah, at dougstevenson.com. Hey, thanks for listening. Until the next episode, I'm Doug Stevenson.